By October 1940, one fact was beyond dispute. You do not stop a modern armored invasion without tanks. That was not an opinion. That was the lesson that every military in Europe had absorbed by watching what mechanized warfare had done to the continent in the previous 12 months. Poland had lasted 27 days. France, with its Maginot Line and its armored divisions and its centuries of military tradition, had collapsed in 46. The formula was clear. Modern tanks plus air support plus motorized infantry equals victory. The country on the receiving end of that formula, no matter how brave, no matter how determined, no matter how well it knew its own terrain, was going to lose. Italy understood this formula. Benito Mussolini had built his military around it. And when he looked at Greece in October 1940, he saw exactly what the formula said he should see. A country with no modern armor. A country with outdated artillery. A country whose soldiers were fighting with equipment that in some cases dated to the previous war, supplied by mule trains through mountain passes, wearing uniforms that were inadequate for the winter that was coming. Italy had tanks. The L-3 tankette, the M13/40, armored vehicles that, whatever their limitations in a direct confrontation with German or British armor, were an overwhelming advantage against an opponent that had nothing comparable. Mussolini's generals did not lie to him about the tank disparity. They told him plainly that Greece could not match Italian armor and that this would be decisive. They were right about the disparity. They were catastrophically wrong about what would happen because of it. Because 6 weeks after the Italian invasion began, Greek soldiers were not hiding from Italian tanks. They were driving them back into Albania against the army that brought them. And what those Greek soldiers said when they climbed inside the vehicles that Italy had abandoned in panic in the mountains, what they found, what they smelled, what they wrote home about, is a story that captures everything about this war that the official histories have never told properly. To understand how Greece ended up driving Italian tanks against Italian soldiers, you have to understand what October 28, 1940 actually looked like from the Greek side. Greece in the autumn of 1940 was not a country preparing for war. It was a country that knew war was coming and was doing everything it could with what it had, which was not much. The Greek army of 1940 was organized around infantry, mountain infantry specifically. Men who had grown up in the terrain that was about to become the battlefield. The Pindus Mountains, the Epirus Valleys, the Albanian border passes that the Italian planners had studied on maps without ever having walked through them in November. Greece had no tank force to speak of. A handful of obsolete French vehicles that barely functioned. No modern armor, no mechanized formations. The kind of military that Italian military intelligence looked at and checked the box marked no armored threat. What Greek military intelligence had that Italy did not anticipate was a different kind of resource entirely. General Alexandros Papagos. Papagos was a methodical, precise, deeply intelligent commander who had spent the months before the invasion studying exactly this problem. How does an infantry army with no tanks defend against a modern armored force? His answer was the mountains, not as an obstacle, as a weapon. The terrain of northwestern Greece and the Albanian border was in November 1940 effectively impassable for the kind of armored advance that Italian doctrine called for. The passes were narrow, the tracks were mud, the river crossings were minimal and defensible. The high ground, held by infantry who knew it, neutralized the advantage of armor that could not reach the positions where the infantry was fighting. Papagos deployed his forces with a precision that Italian commanders, looking at their maps, did not initially understand. They understood it in the first week of fighting. On the other side of the border, in Rome, Mussolini was telling Hitler that Greece would fall in 2 weeks. He was telling his generals the same thing. He had not asked them whether it was true. He had told them it would be true. But there was something else burning in the Greek army in October 1940, something that went beyond orders and strategy and military doctrine. 2 months before the invasion, on August 15th, 1940, the Greek cruiser Elli was anchored in the harbor of Tinos during a religious festival. It was a peacetime anchorage. It was a holy day. The ship was not at battle stations. An Italian submarine fired 3 torpedoes into it. The Elli sank. Greek sailors died, and the Italian government denied any involvement for months, even as the torpedo fragments recovered from the wreck were stamped with Italian markings. The Greeks knew who did it. The sinking of the Elli was not a military operation. It was an act of covert aggression against a country that had not declared war on a holy day against a ship that was not a threat. And the Greek soldiers who went to the Albanian front in October and November 1940 carried that knowledge with them. They were not just defending their country, they were avenging the Elli. This matters enormously to what happens next. The Italian invasion begins on October 28th, 1940. General Alexandros Papagos gives the order to defend. And within weeks, everything Italy expected to happen does not happen. November 14th, 1940. The Greek counteroffensive begins. Papagos has been watching the Italian advance stall for 2 weeks. He has been watching the supply lines stretch thin. The Italian units struggle with terrain they did not train for. The morale of an army that was told this would be easy beginning to fracture under the reality that it is not. He gives the order to attack. Greek infantry units, moving through mountain terrain that the Italians have marked as impassable for offensive operations, begin to push the Italian line back. And almost immediately, Greek soldiers start finding something in the passes and the valleys that the retreating Italians are leaving behind. Tanks, not destroyed tanks, not burning tanks, not tanks that have been fought to a stop and abandoned. Working tanks, intact tanks, tanks with fuel still in them, or tanks stuck in mud and simply left, or tanks abandoned by crews who panicked when the Greek infantry appeared on their flanks and decided that saving themselves was more important than saving the vehicle. The L-3 tankette, the Carro Armato, the machine that was supposed to give Italy its armored advantage over a country with nothing comparable, left in the mud of the Albanian passes for Greek soldiers to find. The first Greek soldiers to encounter them are from the 8th Infantry Division, moving through the area around Kalpaki in the 3rd week of November. One of them climbs inside. What he finds is documented. What he says about it has been preserved. He says the inside is cramped like a coffin. He says it smells of oil and cheap Italian cigarettes. He finds personal photographs of Italian families tucked into the corners of the interior, half-eaten rations, biscuits, instruction manuals in a language none of them can read. He says, it felt like sitting in a metal box destined for the scrap heap, yet here we were, driving it toward their lines. That sentence is the entire Greco-Italian war in one image. Greek soldiers with no armored training, no mechanical expertise beyond what they can figure out from captured instruction manuals they cannot read, climbing into the tanks of the army that invaded them and deciding they are going to drive those tanks back the way they came. The L-3 tankette is not an impressive machine. The Greeks know this immediately. They call it a sardine can. They call it a toy. One soldier, whose account survives in the unit record, says, "It's not a tank, it's a motorcycle with a shield." But then something happens. Someone starts driving one. And the sound the L3 makes when its engine fires up and its machine guns rattle, the high-pitched mechanical clatter of a small vehicle with an outsized attitude, makes a Greek soldier laugh. He says it sounds like a bouzouki, a little bouzouki, Bouzoukaki. The name spreads through the 8th Division and the Mechanized Cavalry Regiment faster than any official designation could. The little Buzzukis, the captured Italian tanks that sound like the most Greek instrument in existence. The name is mockery, but it is also something else. It is the moment that Greek soldiers take ownership of weapons that were supposed to be used against them and make them their own. And they go further than just naming them. On the hull of at least one captured L3, Greek soldiers paint words in Greek letters that say everything about why they are fighting. The Avenger of Elli, the cruiser that Italy sank on a holy day in August, the sailors who died in Tino's harbor, the torpedo fragments stamped with Italian markings that Rome denied for months. The Avenger of Elli is now an Italian tank, driven by Greeks, pointed back at Italy. The naming of the Bouzoukis and the painting of the Avenger of Elli are the moment the psychological balance of the campaign shifts permanently. Italy brought tanks to conquer Greece. Greece named them after musical instruments, painted the name of their fallen sailors on the hull, and drove them back to Albania. By December 1940, the Greek counteroffensive is moving with a momentum that Italian command in Rome has no answer for. The Mechanized Cavalry Regiment has assembled a tank company from the captured L3s. Not many. 40 to 45 vehicles total across the entire front. But enough. Enough to provide mobile fire support for infantry advances. Enough to hold road junctions while infantry moves around flanks. Enough to appear out of the mountain passes at moments that Italian defensive planning did not account for, because Italian defensive planning did not anticipate that Greece would have tanks. December 4th, 1940. The advance on Gjirokastër begins. Major General Nikolaos Papadopoulos is commanding the Greek First Army Corps. Colonel Georgios Stenotas is commanding the Mechanized Cavalry Regiment. The objective is the town of Gjirokastër, a strategic position in southern Albania that, if taken, opens the road toward the coast and threatens to cut off entire Italian formations. The tank company of captured L3s moves with the First Army Corps advance. Facing them is the Italian Ferrara Division, dug into defensive positions along the Drinos Valley Road to Gjirokastër. The Ferrara has its own armor, its own artillery, its own prepared positions. What it does not have is a plan for what happens when the tanks advancing toward it are its own. The sight of Italian L3 tankettes flying Greek colors advancing toward Italian positions produces a reaction that Italian after-action reports from this period describe with a consistency that speaks to how widespread the psychological impact is. The Ferrara Division's reports describe the experience as encountering their own ghosts. An Italian corporal from the 31st Tank Regiment, writing home in a letter that gets through the censors, uses a phrase that captures what the Italian soldiers are feeling. He writes, "To see the tricolour replaced by the Greek cross on our own carry was a blow to the soul. We were being hunted by our own ghosts, hunted by their own ghosts." The L3s that Italy abandoned in the mud of the November passes are now advancing back toward them. The tanks that Italian crews left because they ran out of fuel, or because they panicked, or because they decided saving themselves was more important than the vehicle are being driven by Greek soldiers who learn to operate them from manuals they cannot read, maintained by mechanics who are figuring it out as they go, fueled from captured Italian supply dumps. Some of those tanks carry the words, "The Avenger of Elli," coming back. On December 8, 1940, Greek forces enter Gjirokastër. The Buzzukis have done their job. Only 2 L3s are lost in the entire Gjirokastër offensive, one to a mechanical accident, one in a direct skirmish. The rest keep moving. In Rome, General Ugo Cavallero has just taken command of Italian forces in Albania after Mussolini fires his third general of the campaign. Cavallero is not a man who lacks for bluntness. He arrives in Albania and begins filing reports that, stripped of their military language, say one thing very clearly: this is a catastrophe. His diary entry from January 1941 uses one word to describe the state of Italian equipment across the Albanian front: scandaloso, scandalous. What history remembers as his hemorrhage of steel summary of the situation reads, "The amount of abandoned material is scandalous. Entire batteries, hundreds of trucks, and tanks left for the enemy to pick up. It is not a retreat. It is a hemorrhage of steel." He goes further. He writes something that is more damaging than any tactical assessment. He writes that the Italians have lost the sense of technical superiority because the Greeks are better at maintaining Italian equipment than the Italians themselves. Read that again. The general commanding the Italian army in Albania is writing in his private diary that the Greeks, the army that was supposed to have no mechanical capability, no armored expertise, no capacity to operate modern weapons, are maintaining Italian tanks better than the soldiers who were trained to use them. The little Bouzoukis, the Avengers of Elli, are not just a military asset. They are a humiliation that goes to the heart of everything Mussolini told his country about the Italian military. You're watching this right now because something about this story pulled you in. Most people have never heard about the Buzzukis. They've never heard about Greek soldiers driving Italian tanks back into Albania, about the Avenger of Elli painted on a captured hull, about Cavallero's hemorrhage of steel, about the Italian corporal who wrote about being hunted by his own ghosts. If you think that silence is wrong, subscribe. We fill that silence one video at a time. January 15th, 1941. The Hellenic Army General Staff does something that would have seemed impossible 6 weeks earlier, before the counteroffensive, before Gjirokastër, before the Buzukis. They establish the 19th Mechanized Division, a Greek mechanized division built from captured Italian equipment, commanded by Major General Nicolaus Liumbas, equipped with 18 captured Italian L3 tankettes, British-supplied universal carriers, and captured Italian trucks for logistics. Think about what this represents. Greece, which began the war with no functioning tank force, now has a mechanized division, built entirely from vehicles that Italy brought to conquer it and left behind in panic. The British advisor assigned to observe the 19th Mechanized Division, Brigadier H.V.S. Charrington, dismisses them in his reports as recently enlisted garage hands. The Greek soldiers of the 19th do not care what Charrington thinks. They are the Mechanized Division. They have the Bouzoukis. They have the Avengers of Elli. They are the army that Italy said would fold in 2 weeks and is now, in January 1941, driving Italian tanks in Italian-controlled territory. The 19th moves to Larissa for training in February. It moves to the Kilkis-Lachanas area in eastern Macedonia in March. And in April 1941, when everything changes, when Germany enters the war and the mathematics of the situation shift in ways that no amount of Greek courage can overcome, the 19th Mechanized Division is in the line. April 6, 1941. Germany launches Operation Marita, the invasion of Greece. The forces arrayed against Greece now include the German 2nd Panzer Division, not Italian L-3 tankettes, German panzers, a completely different category of weapon, a completely different scale of problem. The 19th Mechanized Division, with its Buzzukis and its British carriers and its garage hand crews who taught themselves to operate captured Italian armor from instruction manuals they couldn't read, is deployed to defend the left flank of the Metaxas line between Kilkis and Lahana. They hold. For 4 days, April 6th to April 10th, the 19th Mechanized Division fights the German 2nd Panzer Division near Doiran Lake. The 192nd and 193rd Regiments are eventually overrun. The division is destroyed piecemeal, as the official history records it, against a different enemy with different weapons and a different weight of force behind them. But they hold for 4 days. On the night of April 8th, the crews of the Bouzoukis receive orders to abandon the L-3s. The German Luftwaffe has been hitting the positions with Stuka dive bombers that the L-3s have no answer for. The decision is made to prioritize the remaining British Bren carriers and save the crews. The little Buzzukis are left behind. The Avengers of Elli are left behind. Not in panic this time. Not abandoned by crews running from Greek infantry. Left deliberately, with orders, by soldiers who had learned to maintain them from Italian manuals they couldn't read, who had driven them across 3 months of a counteroffensive that nobody thought was possible, who had named them after a Greek musical instrument and painted the name of their fallen sailors on the hull and made them something that Italy never intended them to be. A symbol. The road south, the highway that Greek forces used during the retreat from Albania, through the Vjosa River Valley, past the bridge at Ponte Pirati that becomes a bottleneck in the final days, is littered with vehicles. Captured Italian Fiat trucks, L-3 tankettes, artillery pieces, all of them now bearing Greek markings, all of them abandoned under German air attack. The Stukas that destroy these columns do not distinguish between Greek equipment and captured Italian equipment. They hit everything on the road. But the German officers who survey the aftermath write something in their reports that captures the full scope of what the Greeks did with what they were given. A German officer's assessment, filed with the 2nd Panzer Division, describes finding the wrecked columns on the Albanian road. He notes the Italian equipment bearing Greek markings. He notes the improvised repairs, the jury-rigged fuel systems, the evidence of mechanical work done by men who were learning as they went. He writes, "The Greeks have fought a 20th century war with 19th century logistics, aided by 1930s Italian scrap metal." Italian scrap metal. That won. The story of the Buzzukis does not end when the Greek army retreats. It echoes, inside Italy first. The image of Italian tanks flying Greek colors, firing at Italian soldiers, advancing into Italian-held territory. This image cannot be contained by the fascist propaganda apparatus, no matter how hard it tries. When Italian units occasionally recapture an abandoned L-3 near Pogradec or elsewhere, the fascist press in Rome runs the story as a heroic recovery of honor, a triumphant reclamation of Italian military pride. The Italian soldiers who read these stories know what actually happened. They know the Greeks only abandoned those vehicles because they ran out of fuel during their own retreat from the Germans. They know the headlines are covering a humiliation with the language of victory. The morale impact compounds through the Italian army in Albania across the winter of 1940 and into 1941. Cavallero's diary captures it. The soldiers' letters capture it. The consistent theme across the Italian accounts from this period is a military that has stopped believing its own doctrine. Italy invaded with the certainty of technical superiority. That certainty is gone by January 1941. It does not come back. The broader consequence is what the Greek campaign does to the Axis timetable. Germany's intervention in April 1941 is necessitated by Italy's failure. The 5 weeks that Operation Marita adds to the German calendar in the Balkans are 5 weeks that do not get added back to Operation Barbarossa. The invasion of the Soviet Union begins on June 22, 1941, instead of the original May 15th target date. The Buzzukis are one small piece of a much larger story, but they are a piece of it. Inside Greece, the story of the captured tanks becomes part of the national memory of the war almost immediately. The counteroffensive into Albania, the formation of the 19th Mechanized Division, the image of Greek soldiers driving Italian equipment back to its source, the words "Ektikitis tis Elli" painted on the hull of a captured sardine can. These become part of the story that Greeks tell about what happened in 1940 and 1941. Not the story of defeat, not the story of the German occupation that followed and its brutalities. The story of the 3 months between October 1940 and March 1941, when a country with no modern armor, no tank force, no mechanized formations, stopped one of the Axis powers cold, built its own mechanized division from the wreckage the enemy left behind, and named those tanks after a musical instrument. Because if you are going to drive someone else's abandoned weapon back toward the army that brought it, you might as well give it a name that makes you smile, and paint the name of your fallen sailors on the hull, so they know who is coming. The L3 tankettes that Greece captured are mostly gone now. A few survive in museums. The Hellenic Army Historical Museum in Athens has examples. The vehicles that Italian crews abandoned in the mud of the November passes, that Greek soldiers learned to operate from manuals they couldn't read, that rattled through the Albanian winter sounding like Bouzoukis. Most of them ended their service in the wreckage on the road to Ponte Pirati, destroyed by German Stukas in April 1941. The 19th Mechanized Division was destroyed as a fighting formation in the German invasion. Its regiments, the 192nd and the 193rd, were overrun near Doiran Lake. Major General Liumbas and the survivors went into the chaos of the Greek defeat and occupation. The soldiers who drove the Buzzukis went home to an occupied country, to the 3 years of German and Italian occupation that would kill more Greeks through starvation, reprisals, and deportation than the military campaign had, but the record exists. The Hellenic Army General Staff's official history records the 19th Mechanized Division, its formation, its equipment, its combat record. Cavallero's diaries, published after the war, contain what history remembers as his hemorrhage of steel. The letter from the Italian corporal of the 31st Tank Regiment, hunted by our own ghosts, survived. The account of the Greek soldier who climbed into the abandoned L3 near Kalpaki and smelled cheap Italian cigarettes and oil and decided he was going to drive this thing toward the Italian lines. That survived too. The words "Ektikitis tis Elli" painted on that hull survived in the historical record. The Avenger of Elli, a captured Italian sardine can, driven by a Greek soldier who couldn't read the instruction manual, pointed at the army that sank the Elli on a holy day in August and denied it for months. That is the story, and the name survived. Bouzoukis, the little Buzzukis, the name that a Greek soldier gave to a captured Italian tankette because of the sound it made. The name that spread through the 8th Division and the mechanized cavalry regiment because it was exactly right, small, improbable, making more noise than seemed possible for its size, and unmistakably, defiantly Greek. Italy brought tanks to take a country. Greece named them after musical instruments, painted the names of their dead sailors on the hull, and drove them home. If this story is still in your head right now, if you're still thinking about it, that like button is the right response. Hit it. This channel is built on the belief that the stories nobody tells are often the most important ones. If you share that belief, subscribe. We'll keep finding them. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if this story connects to your family's history, any family, any country, tell us. These moments belong to everyone. Thank you for carrying the weight of the Buzzukis forward. The men who drove them carried something heavier. The least we can do is remember it.